to do with fertility and creativity. Plath began to learn to keep bees after the birth of her son, and it was the local midwife who inducted her into this strange ceremonial world of beekeeping. There's a great deal in the beekeeping poems that has to do with childbirth. Again, the tension this time between the self that's sexually fertile and the self that's aesthetically fertile.
The Beekeeper's Daughter. A garden of mouthings, purple, scarlet speckled, black, the great corollas dilate, peeling back their silks. Their musk encroaches, circle after circle, a well of scents almost too dense to breathe in. Hieratical in your frock coat, maestro of the bees, you move among the many-breasted hives. My heart under your foot, sister of a stone. In burrows narrow as a finger, solitary bees keep house among the grasses. Kneeling down, I set my eye to a whole mouth and meet an eye, round, green, disconsolate as a tear. Father, bridegroom, in this Easter egg under the coronal of sugar roses, the queen bee marries the winter of your year.
He told her that he could catch bees. They wouldn't sting him. They were the male bees. And he caught a bee. This must have been at the end of the summer when the males had emerged. And he held it to her ear, and she heard the buzzing of the bee. And then he let it go. And she thought it was very wonderful. Her father was very masterful. He could catch bees, and they wouldn't dare to sting him.
Great love of her father, great love. Sylvia seems to have fabricated him. Sylvia was a product, really, a product of immigrant family, intense ambition of her mother's. That was Sylvia's love of her father. That he himself may have been quite an ordinary man, but that he had been Sylvia's bastion against her mother. That when he died, then to really let all rip and just took Sylvia over, and to become this model little girl, almost the way it must have happened with child film stars.
Towards the end of the Colossus, she discovered Theodore Roethke, who also wrote, in his best period, poems about a very overpowering father. It's a question of her finding her own voice. This is what every writer in any medium does. When you're young, you shop around, don't you? What Eliot said, you know, immature poets imitate mature poets steal. And what he meant by that is you shop around for styles when you're young, when you're working it out, finding out who you are. You try on various suits. Then later, you finally discover your own voice.
In the Colossus, she is enclosed in the kind of patriarchal history that the father comes to represent. She's enclosed in this figure of this sort of gigantic God-father figure, the dead father. She is inhabiting him. She squats in his left ear. She tries to put him together. She isn't really sure whether she wants to escape from him or whether she wants to reconstruct him.
The Colossus. I shall never get you put together entirely, pieced, glued, and properly jointed. Mule bray, pig grunt, and bawdy cackles proceed from your great lips. It's worse than a barnyard. Perhaps you consider yourself an oracle, mouthpiece of the dead, or of some god or other. 30 years now I have labored to dredge the silt from your throat. I am none the wiser. A blue sky out of the Oresteia arches above us. O Father, all by yourself you are pithy and historical as the Roman Forum. It would take more than a lightning stroke to create such a ruin. Nights I squat in the cornucopia of your left ear out of the wind, counting the red stars and those of plum color.
I have one photograph that I took myself of Ted with Frida in our flat. Please note the very large wedding ring, which is not usual among Englishmen at all. It is a kind of a symbol of how seriously he took the marriage. And in a strange, ironic way, what a wonderful husband he was. The first stage was obviously that he was very much in love with her. The second possibly was that he felt that she would be better and happier and that he could save the marriage if there were children.
She became, or began to become, a real person. And the artifices were peeling away, which obviously they do when you have children. And it meant an enormous amount to Sylvia that she just had Frida. Frida was just plain born without being dragged from her in some sterilized hospital. She loved the word midwife. She was always using that. I thought that was rather splendid. My midwife, she'd say.
Has the baby made a big difference to the running of the house?
Well, actually, I was amazed when I found how easy she was. I had wondered if I'd be swallowed up in motherhood and never feel any time to myself, but somehow she's fitted in beautifully and is amazingly little trouble. I mean, she doesn't yell and cry, and she plays by herself and is very amusing. And I think both of us have written a good many poems to her and find her more entertaining than anything. I think we're both very much family-oriented. I mean, I envision a large house sort of stocked with small children and small animals.
Where do you live?
Really up by Primrose Hill in the zoo. That's one of the reasons we like it so much. We're always going to the zoo with the baby and so forth. We can hear the seals barking in the summertime.
They absolutely fell in love with our district, which was on and around Primrose Hill. They adored it. Everybody does. I mean, it's very beautiful. Because it's not only lots of trees and lots of grass, but it undulates. It looks like the country.
Sylvia and Ted went back to America in 1957, where she taught for a year at her old college, Smith. Then they decided that academic life wasn't for them. So they returned to England, spent about a year in London in a cramped little apartment near Primrose Hill, and then they found themselves a lovely old house in a rather run-down village in Devon. As usual, Sylvia got herself involved in village life. She took up beekeeping and learned to ride on a rather stolid old horse called Ariel. It was in Devon that she finally discovered her own powerful, authentic voice and wrote many of the poems that were later collected in Ariel. And it was in Devon that her marriage began to go wrong. The Moon and the Yew Tree is one of those kind of crucial poems where you can see everything happening, that you can see the old Sylvia and the new Sylvia coming together. The inspiration for the poem was, in fact, an exercise Ted gave her. He said, "Why don't you write about the tree in the churchyard near the house?" So she got up at 4 in the morning and wrote a poem about that, although the result was a long way from what Ted had expected. The grasses unload their griefs on my feet as if I were God, prickling my ankles and murmuring of their humility. Fumy spirituous mists inhabit this place, separated from my house by a row of headstones. I simply cannot see where there is to get to. Now, the point about that is the opening lines, the fumy spirituous mists and prickling my ankles and murmuring of their humility. That's old style. That's elegant, elegiac, very carefully cadenced, very beautiful, very cadenced, yeah? And then suddenly there's this voice comes out. I simply cannot see where there is to get to.
The moon and the yew tree. This is the light of the mind, cold and planetary. The trees of the mind are black. The light is blue. The grasses unload their griefs on my feet as if I were God,